Hey guys, today I'll show you a fantasy thriller TV series named The Wheel of Time Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The Wheel of Time is the heart of this fantastical world, driven forward by a powerful force known as the One Power, which shapes time itself. Some gifted individuals can harness this one power, and they are called the Weavers. These mages wield two opposing forces, the male half and the female half, each controlled by women and men, respectively. In the present world, however, only female weavers remain, as the male force has been tainted by the Dark One, the evil ruler. Any man who attempts to use the corrupted male force is doomed to madness. The scene shifts to one such man, who was cursed with the male power and is now being hunted by the Weavers, while his brother cheers him on. In truth, though, this brother never existed. He was merely a hallucination, a symptom of the man's madness. Ultimately, this led to his execution. From a distant valley, Weaver Moiraine and her warder Lan witnessed the scene. They are on a quest to find the prophesied dragon reborn, who would be reincarnated as a powerful individual who would either save humanity or destroy it. But it's clear that the man being executed was not him. Their journey next takes them to the region of Two Rivers, where 4 young people meet the age requirements for the dragon reborn. At this moment, a girl named Egwene from the Two Rivers is undergoing a ritual. The village elders push her into the river to help her embrace and connect with the natural force. The elders, known as the Wise Ones, serve as both spiritual leaders and village healers, commanding great respect in the community. Egwene's ritual is seen as a good omen, but her childhood friend Rand doesn't share in the celebratory mood. Rand and his father have just returned from hunting, and with the new year approaching tomorrow, they need to prepare something special for the most important festival of the year. The tavern is buzzing with festive cheer. Matt, notorious for losing every bet, has once again gambled away all his money. Rand and their mutual friend Perrin tease him before turning the conversation to the recent wars. Fortunately, their remote village is rarely touched by conflict. When Egwene returns from her baptismal ritual, she is warmly welcomed by everyone, except Rand, who remains distant and melancholic. The festivities in the tavern continue late into the night until the atmosphere is suddenly broken by the arrival of strangers. Lan, who looks tough and unapproachable, and Moiraine the Weaver wearing her distinctive ring. The villagers grow tense. Such important guests are rare in this isolated mountain village. Moiraine quickly scanned the room and spotted a few young people of the right age. The local Wise One didn't seem too pleased with Moraine's presence, holding some kind of prejudice against the Weavers. Newlywed Perrin didn't stay long. He left early to be with his wife. He's the village blacksmith, strong and skilled at his craft. As for Matt, he's a bit of a troublemaker. His father is a notorious scoundrel, and Matt has inherited some of that mischief. The only time Matt shows any responsibility is when he's caring for his mother and sisters. Egwene's parents own the tavern, and after closing up for the night, they tactfully gave the space to Egwene and Rand. The two were once a couple, but today Rand is upset because the Wise One has chosen Egwene to succeed her. Wise Ones, however, are forbidden to marry or have children and must live out their lives in solitude. Naturally, this troubled Rand. To make matters worse, Egwene hadn't agreed to the offer, but she hadn't refused it either, leading to a tense and unresolved argument between them. Meanwhile, Moiraine and Lan were relaxing in a hot bath, discussing the dragon reborn. Aside from the age of the candidate, they had no other clues to go on. Narrowing it down, they focused on Egwene, Rand, Matt, and Perrin. However, Moiraine wasn't the only one watching them. A strange-looking rider had also arrived in the area. The next morning, a traveling peddler came to the village. Matt produced a string of jewelry from who knows where and traded it with the peddler for a bit of cash and a few lanterns. That night, the villagers would light lanterns to honor their ancestors, but only Moiraine noticed the dark undercurrent lurking beneath the festive atmosphere. She sought out the Wise One, hoping to confirm more details about the village's youth, but the Wise One wasn't cooperative. Her former mentor had once discovered her own ability to wield the One Power and made the arduous journey to the White Tower, the stronghold of the Weavers, to train. However, she was turned away because she appeared too shabby for the haughty Weavers. Ever since, the Wise One had held no respect for them. Moiraine, sensing the tension, found herself at a loss for words. At the same time, Lan was scouting the nearby forest. As expected, he discovered a ritual circle made from animal carcasses. As the sun set, the villagers began lighting lanterns to welcome the new year. They believed the lights would guide the souls of their ancestors toward rebirth, continuing the eternal cycle of the Wheel of Time. Moiraine stood by the river, watching the lanterns drift downstream, her expression tense. Suddenly, Lan warned her that the eyeless were closing in, leading an army of Trollocs. There were too many to fight head-on, and they needed to evade the attack. After releasing the lanterns, the villagers danced and sang, unaware of the impending danger. The entire village was filled with laughter and joy as the New Year celebration continued. Egwene was dancing with the other young people from the village when in the blink of an eye, her partner was suddenly impaled by a blade. A horde of half-human, half-beast monsters had descended upon the village. Caught off guard, the villagers were defenseless against the massive Trollocs, falling one after another beneath their blades. The Wise One remained calm enough to pull Egwene to safety, but those who ran too slowly weren't so lucky. Perrin and his wife fled back to the smithy, locking themselves inside, while Matt returned home only to find his parents hadn't even bothered to check on his sisters. In a panic, Matt rushed back outside to search for them. Fortunately, he found his sisters hiding in a crawl space beneath the house and led them into the forest to escape. The chaotic and terrifying scene left most of the villagers paralyzed with fear, unsure how to fight back, but not everyone was powerless. Rand and his father, both skilled hunters, decided to stand their ground and fight the Trollocs. Unfortunately, Rand's arrows barely pierced their thick hides, and his father's spear wasn't much more effective. That was until his father unsheathed a sealed sword, suddenly displaying an astonishing level of skill, holding his own against the Trollocs. However, the fight eventually wore him down, and he was pinned against a wall. In a desperate move, Rand managed to land a surprise attack, killing the Trolloc and saving his father. Outside, the Wise One and Egwene found themselves cornered by a Trolloc. Armed only with small knives, they prepared to fight for their lives, when suddenly, a burst of energy tore the creature in half. It was Moiraine, unwilling to stand by and let them perish, who had taken the risk of coming into the village to launch a counterattack. She unleashed a wave of fireballs, scorching the surrounding Trollocs, while Lan, with his masterful swordsmanship, cleared any threats near her. Their coordination was flawless, and in moments they had turned the tide of the battle. Seeing this, the villagers rallied and joined the fight, using pitchforks and other farming tools to strike back. Meanwhile, a Trolloc had broken into the blacksmith's shop. Perrin and his wife grabbed hammers and axes and fought back fiercely, overpowering the creature. But then another Trolloc stormed in, and the couple had to face one each, clearly struggling. Despite the difficulty, Perrin's wife managed to kill her opponent with a single blow, while Perrin used his axe to bring down his own adversary. As he swung around at a noise behind him, his axe struck his wife, killing her instantly. Overcome with grief, Perrin collapsed in despair. Outside, the battle was reaching its peak. Moiraine began casting powerful spells, even summoning lightning to strike down their enemies, but the sheer number of Trollocs was overwhelming. In the chaos, the Wise One was dragged off by a Trolloc, her fate unknown. Lan was knocked to the ground, and while he was down, a throwing knife hit Moiraine in the shoulder. More Trolloc reinforcements arrived, but Moiraine, wincing from the pain, pulled the knife from her shoulder and exchanged a determined glance with Lan. They were preparing for an all-or-nothing stand. Moiraine began a lengthy and complex spell, while Lan took on the approaching enemies alone, determined to protect her from any interruption. The stone bricks in the nearby walls seemed to respond to Moiraine's magic, loosening from their places. The building behind her began to collapse, and as Moiraine guided the falling debris, bricks crashed down on the Trollocs, killing or maiming those caught beneath. With the last Trolloc defeated, the building fully crumbled, sending up a thick cloud of dust. The village, now devastated by the battle, was shrouded in a somber, gray haze. Rand and his injured father desperately sought help, but the Wise One had vanished, leaving no one with the skill to heal him. Perrin held his wife's lifeless body, his face etched with sorrow. Moiraine stepped forward to inspect Rand's father's wounds, knowing that most of the Trollocs' weapons were poisoned. With a mere touch, she healed the injury, saving his life. Despite this, suspicion still hung in the air because Moiraine's arrival seemed to coincide with this tragic event. Moiraine then revealed that the Trollocs, just like her, had come for Egwene, Rand, Matt, and Perrin. 20 years ago, a weaver, born blind but able to see the Wheel of Time itself, had witnessed the Dark One's awakening. At the same time, the Dragon Reborn was also born into the world. No sooner had Moiraine spoken these words than flames lit up the mountain. This time, an army of hundreds of Trollocs was approaching. Moiraine was certain now. She had found the dragon reborn. She urged the four to leave with her immediately. The Trollocs were coming for them, and if they stayed, the entire village would be destroyed. These four young people, who had never left their mountain home, were forced to say goodbye to the only life they had known. Following Moiraine, they set out on a journey to the White Tower, where they would seek the guidance of the Weavers. In this world, where powerful Weavers exist, there are also those who fear their power. These people have formed an organization called the White Cloaks, a group of witch hunters in the world of the Wheel of Time. Ruthless and willing to use any means necessary to combat the Weavers, the most feared among them are the Inquisitors. The Inquisitor, known as Valda, captured a Weaver before their eyes, severed her hands, and then burned her at the stake. Compared to such a fate, dying at the hands of Trollocs seemed almost merciful. By daybreak, while the Trollocs were less active, Moiraine had the group stop to rest. She continuously channeled the one power into the horses and her companions, ensuring no one became fatigued. Finally, given a moment to catch their breath, the four young candidates for the Dragon Reborn began discussing their predicament. They had all heard the legend of the Dragon Reborn, the most powerful being in the world, capable of either destroying or saving it. But none of them had ever imagined that one of them might be the dragon. Moiraine urged them not to dwell on it too much and to take advantage of the time to rest. Exhausted, the four quickly fell asleep. As the sun set, Moiraine woke Egwene. Sensing that Egwene didn't fully trust her, Moiraine explained the 3 oaths of the Weavers. They cannot lie, they cannot create weapons intended to kill, and they cannot use the one power as a weapon unless faced with a deadly threat. These oaths are magically binding, and no Weaver can break them. Egwene, who had heard of these oaths before, soon let down her guard. Moiraine had chosen to speak with Egwene privately because she could also channel the one power. Even if Egwene wasn't the Dragon Reborn, she could still become a Weaver and offer significant help. Moiraine handed her a gemstone and guided her in using the one power. The gemstone shimmered, enveloped by energy, and Egwene began to grasp the basics of what it meant to be a Weaver. That night, Rand suddenly felt a strange tightness in his throat. Sitting up, he started coughing uncontrollably. When he put his hand to his mouth, he pulled out a bat. Looking up, he saw a strange figure with eyes ablaze with fire. Rand jolted awake, realizing it wasn't a dream when he saw the ground littered with bat corpses. To his shock, the other 3 had all dreamt of the same horrifying scene. Still shaken, Rand began to suspect that Moiraine was somehow connected to these nightmares. He worried that once they reached the White Tower, Egwene might become a Weaver, while the 3 of them would be relegated to mere protectors, only able to serve as Lan does. Moiraine, however, was in no mood to explain further. She mounted her horse, instructing them to follow her. Egwene, on the other hand, found Rand's fears to be unfounded, since half their village had been slaughtered by Trollocs, and Moiraine had done nothing but protect them. She had even sacrificed her own strength to keep them moving. But Rand, still not fully trusting Moiraine, remained resentful. Mat and Perrin agreed that following Moiraine was the wisest choice, leaving Rand little option but to fall in line. Unfortunately, as they continued on their journey, Lan spotted a group of White Cloaks ahead. Moiraine quickly warned everyone to be cautious and watch their words. Moiraine carefully removed her ring and submitted herself to questioning. She pretended to be a refugee from the 2 rivers trying to pass undetected. However, fate wasn't on her side, as the group happened to include the experienced Inquisitor Valda. He ordered a search of their horses and continued pressing them with questions. Moiraine played along, revealing her injury and spinning a story about being attacked by monstrous wild boars. The White Cloak leader, realizing she was actually referring to Trollocs, decided not to push further. Since the Dark One's minions were also enemies of the White Cloaks, and knowing that Weavers usually don't carry visible wounds due to their healing abilities, they left Moiraine and the group alone. The leader split his forces, some going to confront the Trollocs while Valda stayed behind to continue searching for Weavers. After narrowly escaping the encounter, the group pressed on. Moiraine explained that while Weavers cannot heal themselves, they usually travel in pairs to provide support. This time, however, she was traveling alone, and it had nearly cost her her life. They continued their journey at full speed, but the pace soon began to slow. Along the way, Mat started singing an old folk song. It was a tune all the young candidates knew, though none of them understood the meaning of the lyrics. Moiraine explained that the song was about the ancient two rivers. When the Dark One invaded long ago, the people of the two rivers made a desperate stand while sending messengers to seek help. Although their allies had promised to arrive within 3 days, the people of the two rivers held out for 10 days without seeing any reinforcements. In the end, the Queen of the Two Rivers ordered the elderly and children to hide in the mountains while she and her husband fought to the death. As a last resort, the Queen sacrificed herself to cast a spell that repelled the Dark One's army. The survivors who retreated into the mountains became the ancestors of the current Two Rivers people. After some time, Lan called for a rest near the ruins of a place known as the Forsaken City. Moiraine seemed uneasy about stopping there, but Lan insisted they make camp. The group scattered to gather firewood and water. Perrin sat down to rest and check his wound after filling his water flask. Unexpectedly, the smell of diabetic blood attracted a pack of wolves. Perrin held his breath as the lead wolf approached. To his surprise, the wolf merely licked the wound on his leg and then left without causing harm. That night, Moiraine fell into a deep sleep, snoring like a pig. Her condition was worsening, and the continuous journey had drained her strength. The others also drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, Egwene suddenly woke up. To her horror, the eyeless and his army had already caught up to them. Lan quickly scooped up the unconscious Moiraine, and the group fled for their shitty lives towards the one place Moiraine had feared most, the Forsaken City. As they neared the city walls, their Ferrari horses refused to go any further, and even the Trollocs halted, afraid to approach. The towering walls of the Forsaken City loomed ahead, with a massive crack running through them. Lan led the group through this breach. The city they had entered was called Shadar Logoth, once the largest city in the world during the time of the ancient wars. It was this city that had promised to send aid to the two rivers long ago, only to break its word. While other nations fought to the death, Shadar Logoth chose isolation, building tall, gateless walls in the hope of surviving alone. When the war finally ended, survivors broke through the city's walls to scavenge for supplies, only to find the entire city empty since its inhabitants mysteriously vanished. From that point on, this place became the Forsaken City, a place so feared that not even Trollocs dared to enter. No one knew what dangers might lurk here. The group had to be cautious, avoiding contact with anything within the ruins. Matt sat down beside Perrin, who was clearly devastated. Matt handed him the dagger he had purchased from Perrin's wife. As Perrin held the weapon his wife had crafted with her own hands, he couldn't hold back his crocodile tears. He thanked Matt and offered a silent prayer for the survivors from their village. Soon, the group drifted into sleep. In his wet dreams, Matt suddenly heard whispers that woke him with a start. Following the sound, he stumbled upon a beautifully jeweled dagger hidden in the eerie ruins. Since he had given his own dagger to Perrin, this one seemed like a gift from fate. Just as he picked it up, the horses outside began to whinny in fear, waking everyone. Before their eyes, the horses were enveloped in shadows and turned to ash in an instant, leaving the group in shock. It was then that Moiraine realized that Lan had led them into Shadar Logoth while she had been asleep. The spreading shadows soon divided the group into 3 separate parties, leaving them unable to regroup. Their only option was to flee in different directions. Lan managed to stay with the remaining horses and carried Moiraine out of the city the same way they had entered, through the crack in the wall. Matt and Rand fled toward the outer city, narrowly escaping through a small gate and making their way into the city's drainage system. Together they kicked down the grate and escaped into the open air. As soon as the shadow reached the city walls, it recoiled, seemingly unable to extend beyond the city's boundaries. Meanwhile, Egwene and Perrin had been chased to the top of a high wall by the dark force. With nowhere left to run, they had no choice but to leap from the wall into the moat below, leaving their fate to chance. Fortunately, they landed safely in deep water, and after struggling to the surface, they swam to shore. Despite calling out for their companions, there was no sign of them. Meanwhile, Rand and Matt had floated down a different river, clinging to driftwood. As for Lan and Moiraine, they didn't encounter any more Trollocs after escaping, but their path was blocked when they were ambushed by the surviving Wise One, who held a knife to their throats. The timeline shifts slightly back. During the Trolloc raid on the village, one of the creatures captured the Wise One. On the way, it stumbled upon another injured Trolloc, and in a gruesome display, tore its private but smelly apart and devoured it. Seizing this moment, the Wise One fled and was chased into a cave. Hearing the howls of the Trolloc outside, she hid in a water-filled pool inside the cave. When the Trolloc entered to search, she held her breath and stayed still, though the beast eventually guessed she was in the water and began attacking. Just when it seemed all was lost, the Wise One struck from the depths, stealing the creature's secondary weapon and killing it with a single blow. Her skill and courage had saved her life. After her escape, the Wise One tracked Egwene and the others, eventually catching up to Lan and Moiraine. Using her mastery that allows her to predict weather through the flow of air, tracking them had been easy. However, despite gaining the upper hand initially, she was no match for Lan and was quickly subdued. Elsewhere, Rand was shouting Egwene's name as they wandered the wilderness, only for Mat to hush him, warning that if any Trollocs heard them, they'd all be dead. Though Mat wanted to return home to protect his sisters, he realized that Trollocs might already have reached their village. With the White Tower offering their best chance of regrouping with their friends, they reluctantly decided to continue toward it. Meanwhile, Egwene and Perrin seemed to have gone in the opposite direction. The terrain they were navigating was completely different, and they soon realized they were being tracked by wolves. Forced to stop, they built a fire to ward off the animals and keep warm. Perrin struggled to start the fire with stones, but after several failed attempts, Egwene finally managed to conjure a small flame using her unrefined magical abilities. Like the others, they decided to make their way toward the White Tower, hoping to reunite with their companions there. The next day, Lan gave some water to the Wise One, who was tied to a tree. He knew she wasn't an enemy, and he just wanted her to calm down. By now, the Wise One had likely figured out that they meant no harm to the young people from the village, so she offered to help treat Moraine's injuries. As a Wise One, she had to master many skills, including medicine. She gathered some herbs from the forest and began treating the gravelly ill Moiraine. However, her skills could only slow the spread of the poison temporarily. Fully healing Moiraine would still require the magic of the Weavers. After the basic treatment, Lan suddenly announced that he needed to leave for a while, leaving the Wise One to care for Moiraine. He rode off to a distant cliff where he spotted a sea of red tents in the distance. Back at the camp, the Wise One's medicine had taken effect, and Moraine's condition improved slightly. Lan returned and helped them prepare to continue their journey. In another scene, Perrin appeared back in his blacksmith shop with a flash of the eyeless looming nearby. He then saw a wolf gnawing on his wife's body. Startled, Perrin woke up to find the wolves still following them as they ran through the forest. The situation was dire, and they had no choice but to run wherever the wolves chased them. After escaping the forest, they realized they were completely lost, but the wolves, strangely, were not attacking. Rather, they seemed to be guiding them. Perrin and Egwene discovered deep wagon tracks in the ground and decided to follow them, hoping it would lead them somewhere safe. Compared to the troubles their companions faced, Rand and Mat were in relatively good shape. Aside from the cold, their journey had been mostly uneventful, and they soon arrived at a small town surrounded by a mining area. Mat found a corpse trapped in a cage with a jewel still hanging from the dead man's waist. This place clearly wasn't as peaceful as the Two Rivers. The town was small but bustling, with plenty of people around, though most had rough, unfriendly faces. The two of them bought bowls of hot soup from a tavern and asked the innkeeper if anyone had seen their companions. She mentioned that the only new face in town recently was an old gleeman named Tom. Unlike the typical image of a gleeman, Tom had a booming voice and a rugged presence, looking more like someone not to be trifled with. After finishing a rousing ballad, which earned cheers from the crowd, a thief bumped into Mat, only to be bumped again by Tom, who proudly displayed the purse he'd just lifted from the thief. Mat was about to demand money back, but Tom smirked and said he'd taken it from the thief, and that Mat should consider it a lesson learned. Knowing they were in unfamiliar territory, Rand convinced Mat to let it go. With their coin purse lighter, they didn't have enough money for a room and asked the innkeeper if they could work for a place to stay. After a moment's thought, she agreed and took the two young men to the backyard where they could chop wood for her. Rand got to work right away, but Mat wasn't eager to do hard labor. He left Rand to handle the chopping while he went to ask for lighter tasks, hoping to earn money for his trip back home. To Mat, the whole notion of the Dragon Reborn seemed absurd. He just wanted to return home and take care of his sisters. The innkeeper gave him the job of running errands, which suited Mat's smooth-talking nature. Though reluctant, he had no choice but to accept. While they worked, the innkeeper began asking about their backgrounds. When she learned Mat might split from Rand, she found it odd, thinking Mat looked more like a drifter than someone heading home. But Mat knew that he couldn't leave his sisters with his unreliable parents. Meanwhile, Egwene and Perrin had followed the wagon tracks for a long time and could now see a camp in the distance. Unsure if the camp's inhabitants were friend or foe, Perrin wanted to scout ahead alone, but Egwene insisted they stay together. She noticed Perrin's overwhelming guilt and despair, and she comforted him, urging him to stop blaming himself. For Egwene's sake, Perrin pulled himself together and they pressed on together. As they approached, people from the camp intercepted them, asking if they knew the song. Egwene and Perrin had no idea what they were talking about, but the camp members welcomed them anyway. These people, known as the Wanderers, lived nomadic lives, moving from place to place. Though their reputation wasn't the best, they were actually warm and hospitable. They offered Perrin and Egwene blankets and a hot meal. Back to Rand, his strong build helped him chop a yard full of firewood. The innkeeper, pleased with his work, told him he could stop and offered him a place to rest. Rand expected just a spot on the floor, but to his surprise, the innkeeper gave him an upper room. Not only that, but she even invited him for a drink, her words laced with flirtatious undertones. As the sun set outside, Mat snuck over to the caged corpse, still eyeing the gemstone. But before he could act, Tom appeared behind him, holding a knife. The two stood facing each other with their daggers drawn, but Tom explained that he only wanted to bury the man in the cage. Seeing no ill intent, Mat put away his knife and helped Tom with the body. The corpse was that of a warrior from the Threefold Land. In stories spread across the land, the warriors were often depicted as fearsome and savage, as terrifying as Trollocs. But Tom told Mat that the warriors were feared and misunderstood simply because of their skill in battle, and this particular man had been unjustly killed by the locals. Embarrassed, Mat admitted that he was only after the gemstone to get some money for his journey home. Tom turned away and let him take it, telling Mat to do what he needed. Mat apologized under his breath, took the gemstone, and then helped Tom bury the warrior. The two began to form a bond, and Mat, taking advantage of the newfound friendship, asked for his stolen purse back. Tom agreed, only to realize Mat had already taken it. Laughing, Tom bid him farewell and walked away. Meanwhile, Rand had shared a few drinks with the innkeeper, who seemed interested in him. She kept asking questions and talking about her desire to travel, all but outright suggesting Rand take her with him. Sensing the moment, the innkeeper suddenly leaned in, startling Rand. His mind was on Egwene, and he hadn't picked up on her advances. Realizing her seduction had failed, the innkeeper's demeanor abruptly changed. She locked the door and began muttering to herself, analyzing why her attempt had gone wrong. It was then that Rand realized she knew far more about him and his companions than she should. As he tried to escape, she blocked his way, armed with none other than the family sword Rand had inherited from his father. Although the innkeeper didn't intend to harm Rand, she needed him alive. She stood there, watching him slam into the reinforced ironwood door, confident he wouldn't escape. To her shock, the door flew off its hinges under Rand's force, something not even 5 men could have done. Rand stumbled outside just in time to meet Mat, and they fled together. The innkeeper pursued them relentlessly. Being unfamiliar with the town's layout, Rand and Mat were quickly cornered by the innkeeper, who knew the streets far better. She finally revealed her true motive. She claimed the Dark One had come to her in a wet dream, promising her power and immortality if she delivered the 5 candidates for the Dragon Reborn to him. She believed she could become one of the Forsaken and change the world for the better. Just as she finished her declaration, a throwing knife struck her chicken throat from behind. The attack came from none other than Tom, who had been lurking in the shadows. Recognizing the innkeeper as one of the Dark Friends, humans corrupted and swayed by the Dark One, he intervened to help. Tom warned them that now that a Dark Friend had found them, the Eyeless would soon follow. He suggested they travel east together. Before they left, Rand made sure to retrieve his family sword, and the 3 of them set off into the night. The next day, Moiraine and the others finally caught up with the main group of weavers following Lon's route. Leading them was Liandrin, the same weaver who had been hunting the madman in the first episode. She had captured a man claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. Through the innkeeper's earlier descriptions, it's revealed that the Dark One believes there are 5 candidates for the Dragon Reborn. In addition to the 4 from the small town who were introduced earlier, there's one more dragon yet to appear, likely the man locked in the cage. Additionally, here's an important piece of world building. In the Wheel of Time universe, dreams and reality are interconnected. Dreamers enter an alternate dimension known as the dream world, which actually exists and is not just an illusion. Certain gifted individuals can move between the dream world and the real world, causing events in one to affect the other. This explains why the bats seen in the Dragon Reborn candidate's dreams also appeared as real dead bats in the waking world. Rewinding the timeline a bit, before the man's capture, we see Logain, a man rumored to be the Dragon Reborn, leading his followers in an assault on a kingdom. Logain alone had the strength to breach the city walls, and amidst the chaos of battle, he made his way straight to the king. Ordinary weapons were useless against him, and he quickly cornered the king. As the terrified king cowered before him, two voices echoed in Logan's mind. One urged him to show no mercy and destroy the king, while the other urged him to show compassion. The king tried to attack, but Logan subdued him with the one power. In that moment, Logan made his decision. He healed the king's wounds. As the Dragon Reborn, he had the power to either destroy or save the world, and he had chosen to be a savior. Returning to the present, we see the Weavers' camp is not entirely united. Different colors in their clothing signify different factions. Moiraine's colleagues quickly healed her wounds, and they began discussing the man who claimed to be the Dragon Reborn. Many false dragons have come and gone, but few have been as powerful or amassed as many followers as Logain. It had taken 3 Weavers to suppress his power, and even then, it required 2 of them working together at any given time. Now that Moiraine had arrived, she was able to join the rotation to help maintain the suppression of his abilities. Because Logain had gathered so many followers, the Weavers had to sneak into his camp at night to capture him. They planned to bring him before the leader of the Weavers for judgment. Until then, they had to focus all their efforts on keeping him restrained to prevent any unforeseen disasters. Outside the camp, Lan was practicing swordplay with the other warders. Warders are highly skilled warriors who share a deep, spiritual bond with the Weavers they protect. This bond allows them to sense each other's emotional and physical states. With the warders standing guard, Moiraine and her fellow Weavers could focus on keeping Logain's power under control without fear of being caught off guard. With nothing else to do, Moraine's companions started making small talk, clearly hoping to pry information about the Dragon Reborn from her. Sensing their intentions, Moiraine deftly shifted the conversation, avoiding the topic. Because of Logain's extraordinary abilities, many of the Weavers present began to speculate that perhaps he really was the Dragon Reborn. Meanwhile, Liandrin sought out the Wise One, hoping to glean some of Moiraine's intel, but the Wise One kept her lips tightly sealed and gave away nothing. Soon after, Lan appeared, driving Liandrin away, and reassured the worried Wise One that they would surely find Egwene and the others. After some time recovering at the Wanderers' camp, Egwene and Perrin had to decide whether to continue on their journey alone or travel further with the Wanderers. The hospitality of the Wanderers eventually overcame their initial distrust, and they decided to follow them toward the White Tower. On the way, Perrin noticed that the Wanderers carried no weapons, which surprised him. It turns out that this tribe had forsaken violence for over 1,000 years, believing that violence only brings misfortune and solves nothing. Having accidentally killed his wife in the past, Perrin found this deeply moving. Matt and Rand, having fled non-stop, were exhausted by the afternoon of the second day. They came across a farm and decided to rest there for a while. Tom suggested they sneak into the barn after dark to spend the night. However, before they could, the farm owner discovered them, aiming a bow at them in a show of caution. Rand had no choice but to explain their true intentions. To their surprise, after hearing them out, the farmer lowered his bow and allowed them to stay in exchange for cleaning the stables. So Rand and Matt set about cleaning while Tom slacked off, standing nearby. That night, Matt was behaving strangely. He suddenly grew dizzy and began vomiting, with a black substance dripping from his mouth. At that moment, the farmer's young daughter came over with food for them. Seeing the little girl, Matt couldn't help but think of his own sister. The sweet girl, upon hearing that Matt had a sister, offered him one of her toys to give to his sisters. Meanwhile, Rand and Tom discussed Matt's condition. With his wealth of experience, Tom speculated that Matt might be awakening the One Power. However, since men can only wield the corrupted male power, it would likely drive him mad. Though the Weavers could sever a man's connection to male power, those who survived the process were often left as empty shells, barely alive. Madness was better than death, Tom reasoned, and advised them to stay far away from the Weavers. This suggestion was completely at odds with Rand and Matt's original goal. Later that night, as Moiraine finished her shift, Lan and the Wise One were hosting a bonfire party outside. Over time, the Wise One's views on the Warders had softened, and with that came a lessening of his resentment toward the Weavers. Sensing that Moiraine had returned, Lan came to sit by her side once more. Neither of them believed Logain could be the dragon reborn, if for no other reason than that Logain was at least 10 years older than the dragon prophesied to be. Plus, the Dark One had sent no troops after him. Moiraine couldn't help but feel a pang of regret when she thought about the 4 dragon seeds. After searching for the dragon reborn for so long, she had finally found some clues, only to now be separated from them. In contrast, the atmosphere on Egwene's side was much more cheerful. She had joined the tribe members in a dance party, while Perrin, still indifferent to everything, sat on the sidelines. Casually, he asked Egwene about the song the Wanderers often mentioned. As it turns out, the Wanderers' ancient legend spoke of a song that could bring eternal happiness and joy. However, they had long since forgotten the song, and asking about it had become their way of greeting each other. After the dance, Perrin put his blacksmithing skills to use and repaired the axle of the Wanderer's wagon. He then struck up a conversation with a tribes lady about weapons. The lady's daughter had been killed by bandits, and she had once been consumed by the desire for revenge. However, she came to realize that the best way to counter violence was through peace. The Wheel of Time turns endlessly, and through countless cycles, she believed that she and her daughter would be reunited eventually. Until then, she was determined to give her all to make this world a better place. Perrin, thinking of his late wife, wholeheartedly agreed with her. As the night deepened, Egwene gazed at the firelight, her thoughts drifting to Rand. Her dance partner casually mentioned that at the age of 20, members of the Wanderers must leave the caravan to experience the outside world. Most eventually return, but some choose to stay outside. She wondered if the boys from the 2 rivers would ever have the chance to return home. Under the same starry sky, Rand blew out the candle and fell asleep as the 4 of them entered the world of dreams. Perrin had a nightmare. Mat's hands were covered in blood. Egwene was captured by a strange figure, and Rand woke up with a start. Tom was still beside him, but Mat was nowhere to be seen. The 2 of them went inside, only to find the entire farm family dead. Mat stood in a daze, pointing his dagger vaguely in the direction of the eyeless. Tom urged Rand to leave with Mat while he stayed behind to cover their escape. He drew 2 daggers, preparing to confront the eyeless himself. Mat, filled with grief and anger at the sight of the dead girl, had no choice but to flee. While that group endured a harrowing night, dawn broke peacefully for the others. Liandrin had spent all night gathering information about the dragon reborn. Her true aim was to find evidence that Logain was a false dragon. That way, she wouldn't have to keep painstakingly restricting his power and could instead eliminate his one power. However, aside from her faction, the other Weavers remained adamant that Logain should be brought before the Weaver leader. At this moment, Lan is kneeling in the mountain forest, performing a ritual. Upon seeing the Wise One approach, he explained that it was a prayer to honor his old homeland and to seek the return of his ancestral roots. Hearing this, the Wise One recited a blessing, paying respect to Lan's homeland. Although the Wise One did not understand the meaning of the ancient words, they were the wishes left by her parents before they sacrificed themselves to protect her. Lan then told her that these were the words spoken by the king of the 2 rivers to his wife before he died in battle in ancient times. Lan's knowledge surprised the Wise One, and at that moment, it seemed like a hormone spark had ignited between them. Just then, a commotion erupted in the distance. It turned out Logain's followers had come to break him out of prison. A barrage of arrows whistled through the air, but with the Weavers present, they quickly took control, sending the arrows flying back at their attackers. Despite their efforts, the sheer number of foes forced them into a defensive retreat, setting up a blockade at the entrance to the cave where Logain was held. A fierce battle erupted in the forest outside the cave. Though the Weavers had an overwhelming advantage in combat prowess, Logain's followers, undeterred and bolstered by their numbers, began to push them back. Inside the cave, Logain sensed his followers' arrival, and in a sudden surge of power, broke through his seal, throwing the Weavers guarding him aside. He then unleashed the male power, burning his cage to ashes. At this moment, Moiraine arrived at the cave. Rather than attack, she asked Logain why he believed himself to be the dragon reborn. Logain replied that he could hear the dragon's whispers, claiming that it was his destiny, granted by the Wheel of Time. Moiraine recognized this as a sign of madness caused by his use of male power. As powerful as he was insignificant compared to the real dragon reborn. Together with 2 other guards, she attempted to suppress Logain once more, but he managed to seize an opening and shot one of the Weavers dead. The warders outside, sensing the death of one of their own, were thrown into disarray. Lan led the Wise One and several companions into the cave to provide assistance. Due to overusing her one power, Liandrin's body began to overload. At that moment, the warder arrived, furious and determined to avenge the Weavers. He swung his axe at Logain, but the force was so intense that the axe shattered on impact. The shards struck Lan first, piercing his neck, and he was on the verge of death. Others nearby also fell to the ground, gravely injured. Just then, in a fit of extreme rage, the Wise One unleashed a terrifying surge of one power, instantly healing everyone's wounds, even restoring Lan's life-threatening injury. The Weavers then joined forces to strip Logain of his powers. The Wise One's overwhelming display of power seemed to confirm what Moiraine had said: Logain was insignificant. Although Logain was defeated, the casualties inflicted by his followers were devastating. Many Weavers and Warders died in the conflict. Those who survived held a simple candlelit vigil for their fallen comrades before preparing to move on, knowing they had to continue their journey to avoid further danger. After a long trek, Moiraine and her group finally reached Tar Valon, the bustling city that houses the White Tower, the Weavers' headquarters. Lan's friend, the warder Stepin, was shaken, mourning the death of his weaver. Moiraine arranged for the Wise One to stay at the White Tower, expecting to reunite with the four boys from the village, but none of them were there. Moiraine assured the Wise One that if the dragon seeds were found, she would be notified immediately. In the meantime, the Wise One was instructed to avoid contact with other weavers. After her recent outburst of overwhelming power, the Wise One felt a mix of curiosity and anxiety toward this newfound energy, knowing her life would never return to what it once was. On the other side of Tar Valon, Rand and Mat had also arrived at their destination. Ever since the attack on the farm, Mat had been acting strangely, while Rand was eager to see Egwene, believing they would be reunited in this city. Growing up in a small village, both were awestruck by the grand and bustling city before them. Rand was filled with wonder at everything around him, but Mat remained despondent, as if nothing in life interested him anymore. They splurged on a stay at a nice inn, and it was there that Mat opened up about his worries. Both of them were haunted by the belief that it was Mat, not the eyeless, who had killed the farm girl, leaving them in emotional turmoil. Egwene and Perrin's journey had been slower than the others, and they had just arrived on the outskirts of Tar Valon with their destination in sight. However, before they could proceed, an unexpected event occurred. Inquisitor Valda, leading a group of White Cloaks, had set up checkpoints along the road, searching for weavers. From a distance, Valda recognized Egwene and Perrin, recalling their previous encounter, and immediately ordered their capture. The Wanderers, unwilling to let their guests be harmed, formed a human barrier in front of the White Cloaks. Although the White Cloaks were ruthless towards the Weavers, their doctrine strictly forbade violence against harmless civilians like the Wanderers. As a result, the Wanderers urged Egwene and Perrin to flee. Seeing this, Valda ordered his men to attack. Without using weapons, the White Cloaks raised their fists and charged at the human barrier. Despite their efforts to escape, Egwene and Perrin were eventually caught by mounted White Cloaks. In the Tar Valon library, Rand was reading when suddenly a towering Ogier appeared, startling him. Rand had only heard of these wise and peaceful creatures in legends, and now he was seeing one in the flesh. Ogier were known as friends of humanity, and Rand let down his guard and began conversing with the creature. As they chatted, a sudden noise from the street caught Rand's attention. Looking out the window, he spotted Mat in the crowd below and hurried downstairs to meet him. It turned out that the false dragon, Logain, was being paraded through the streets, with the crowd hurling insults at the madman. As Logain passed Mat, he suddenly looked at him and burst into maniacal laughter. Mat was startled, but then composed himself and made a pact with Rand. He insisted that if one of them ever became tainted by the male power and lost their mind, the other must end it. Rand, hesitant but unable to refuse, reluctantly agreed to Mat's request. Inside the White Tower, Stepin was dressing in white, preparing for the farewell ceremony for his fallen weaver. Staring at his reflection in the mirror, memories flooded back. He recalled the moment when a weaver had rescued him from the grief of his father's death and gave him, then just a street thug, the title of warder. Now that same weaver had died before him, a bitter disgrace for a warder. During the ceremony, Stepin placed the symbol of the weaver into the forge, bidding farewell to his partner forever. It was a pain deeper than losing a blood relative. Lan was equally sorrowful and sought comfort in Moiraine's company afterward. After the ceremony, Stepin sought out the Wise One, knowing that as a healer, she could prepare herbs to help him sleep. The Wise One, understanding that Stepin was suffering from overwhelming grief and likely unable to rest, made a sleeping draft for him. Noticing that Stepan hadn't closed the door behind him, the Wise One decided to take a walk outside to explore. It was then that Liandrin suddenly appeared, striking up a conversation with her. She subtly tried to win the Wise One over, hinting that she should not blindly follow Moiraine's advice and encouraging her to explore Tar Valon more freely. On the other side, Egwene had been stripped of her clothing and subjected to a thorough cleansing by the White Cloaks, as if she were some kind of defiled object. Meanwhile, Perrin was not bathed or given fresh clothes, but was instead tied to a rack. Egwene desperately tried to explain that she was not a weaver, and in this, she was telling the truth. Valda had suspected all along that Egwene wasn't a weaver, but he believed that even if she wasn't one yet, she would surely become one in the future. Egwene, in a panic, claimed she was incapable of using one power, a clear lie. As an inquisitor, Valda had a unique instinct for uncovering falsehoods. Though his doctrine forbade him from killing an innocent girl, torture was well within his rights. However, instead of harming Egwene, he turned his attention to Perrin, slashing him in a way that caused his pupils to turn yellow. Valda knew that hurting Perrin would increase the likelihood of Egwene confessing. After the torture, Valda gave them a cruel ultimatum. Either Egwene admitted to possessing magic, and Perrin would live, or Perrin would die under further torture, and Egwene would be set free. That night, Rand and Mat welcomed an unexpected guest. The Ogier happened to encounter the Wise One in front of the White Tower. Recognizing the attire of the people from the Two Rivers, he brought her to Rand. When two villagers from the same homeland met, tears welled up in their eyes. After hugging Rand, the Wise One noticed that something was off with Mat. Rand explained to her that Mat seemed to have awakened the One Power, but he didn't want his friend to meet the same fate as the false dragon. She agreed with Rand's thoughts. They couldn't easily hand Mat over to the Weavers. They had to solve this problem themselves. Besides Mat, Rand was also deeply worried about Egwene. It had been more than a month since they were separated in the Forsaken City, and he was desperate to know her condition. Unfortunately, Egwene wasn't doing well. She struggled to reach for the knife on the table, but to no avail. Perrin had never recovered from the sorrow of accidentally killing his wife. Faced with a dilemma, he insisted on sacrificing himself so that Egwene could live, believing it would bring him peace as well. Egwene, of course, would never betray her friend to save herself. When Valda resumed the torture, Perrin's pupils turned yellow again. In a flash of inspiration, Egwene cast a spell to distract Valda. She launched a small fireball as a feigned attack, but secretly burned through the ropes binding Perrin. Perrin exploded with fury, startling Valda. Egwene swiftly stabbed Valda and Perrin before fleeing the tent. Outside, a pack of wolves attacked the White Cloaks in the camp, allowing the two to escape under their cover. Turning to Moiraine, she had been away from the White Tower for 2 years, so she wasn't familiar with the recent power struggles. However, the Wise One she brought back was a rising star with immense potential, and Moiraine couldn't avoid getting caught up in the battle to recruit her. Yet when facing the imposing Liandrin, Moiraine was clear on one thing: the Wise One would never join her faction. Later, Moiraine discussed the situation in the White Tower with her own faction. As one of the most powerful weavers, Moiraine was a strong contender for the Weaver leader, and Liandrin's influence had also been growing rapidly, making her another contender for the position. This put Moiraine in a delicate position. However, she had no interest in power struggles. She was more concerned with whether anyone in the prison could rebuild their bond with Stepan, but overcoming the pain of losing one's soul companion was no easy task. During this time, Lan rarely left Stepan's side, spending more time with him than with Moiraine. They drank through the night, reminiscing about old times and sharing the latest gossip. Stay tried to get Lan to talk about the spark between him and the Wise One, but Lan had no intention of developing feelings, even if he had any. As they drank, morning crept up on them. Suddenly, Lan realized that Stepan had drugged him with a sleeping potion, causing him to pass out. Sensing something was wrong, Lan hurriedly chased after him, only to find that Stepan had managed to slip away and chose to end his life, putting an end to his heart-wrenching pain. This tragedy was even more heartbreaking than the deaths of the Weavers on the battlefield. Everyone was deeply saddened by what had happened, but their duties didn't allow them to show too much vulnerability. Lan openly released his emotions in front of Stepan's body. The others could only beat their chests in silent support of their fallen comrade. Normally a stoic man who wouldn't make a sound even when severely injured, Lan now let out a gut-wrenching wail, pouring out his grief over the loss of his dear friend. The scene shifts to a flashback. In a secluded mountain forest, a fisherman's family lived in peace. The young girl, Suan, lived with her father, who had a disability in one of his hands, and they survived by fishing. When her father struggled to cast the net, Suan would secretly use her strange weaving abilities to help. However, her father was deeply worried. If her powers were discovered, it would lead to a terrible fate. After their home was burned down, her father, fearing Siwan would fall into the hands of the White Cloaks, sent her downriver in a Tesla boat, telling her to go to the place where she truly belonged, the White Tower. With tears in her eyes, Siwan waved goodbye to her father. Back to the present, the once terrified girl had grown into the leader of the Weavers and now sits as the Weaver leader. Today, she presides over the trial of the false dragon, Logain, who caused immense damage to the White Tower. Despite Siwan's imposing presence, Logain remained unafraid. He boldly declared that the Weavers were in decline, and that even though they captured him, people would only remember how 3 of them had struggled to defeat him, and 1 had even been killed. Siwan, unfazed by his provocations, calmly delivered her verdict. She knew that Logan, now severed from his connection to the male power, was spiraling into madness, a fate worse than death. For this reason, she spared him the mercy of execution and sentenced him to eternal imprisonment as a warning to others. With Logan's trial concluded, it was time to address the actions of Moiraine and her group. According to the rules, Logain should have been brought to the White Tower for judgment before any punishment was administered. Acting ahead of the Tower's decision violated the protocols of the Weavers. Liandrin spoke up in defense, explaining that Logain was too powerful, and had they not acted when they did, they all would have died. However, she quickly shifted the blame, arguing that a more serious issue was Moiraine's failure to report the discovery of the most powerful recruit in centuries. As a member of the Blue Sect's intelligence branch, Moiraine had failed to issue warnings about both the Trolloc invasion and Logain's army, and now she had to face judgment for her negligence. Moiraine couldn't openly reveal that she had been searching for the Dragon Reborn, especially now that she had found the dragon seeds. As a result, she gave only vague answers. Siwan, however, suspected that Moiraine had been neglecting her duties while spending time outside the tower. Furious, she accused Moiraine of dereliction of duty and announced that she would pass judgment on her the next day. After the meeting, Moiraine ran into Liandrin, whose face was filled with smug satisfaction. Liandrin believed she had successfully undermined her rival. Little did she know, Moiraine had no interest in these petty power struggles. She had far more important matters to attend to. Through her tracking of the Wise One, Moiraine and Lan had located Rand and Mat, hiding out in an inn. Rand feared that Mat would suffer the same fate as the false dragon, who had been paraded through the streets. Lan had no choice but to subdue Rand, allowing Moiraine to focus on helping Mat. As one of the most powerful weavers, Moraine's actions were extraordinary. She quickly identified the cursed dagger that Mat had brought back from the Forsaken City and drew out the shadowy curse from Rand's body. Using her own body as a conduit, she drove the curse back into the dagger. The results were immediate. Color quickly returned to Mat's face. Seeing this, Rand apologized to Moiraine and thanked her for her help. Moiraine, however, was surprised by Mat's resilience. Normally, anyone who possessed the dagger would be consumed by darkness within days, but Mat had endured for over a month. It seemed the people from the Two Rivers truly were remarkable. At the same time, Moiraine reprimanded the Wise One for her carelessness. If the Wise One had spoken up earlier, Mat wouldn't have come so close to disaster. With Rand and Mat safely in her care, Moiraine felt somewhat relieved. She bathed and changed, preparing to meet someone important. However, the leader of the Blue Sect unexpectedly appeared and ordered Moiraine to remain in the White Tower and not venture out again to avoid further criticism. The day was full of surprises. Just as Moiraine stood up, she was called away by one of her sisters from the Yellow Sect. It turned out that Perrin had been secretly brought in for treatment. When Moiraine met them, she was surprised to hear that they had been captured by the White Cloaks, but somehow managed to escape unharmed. Not only that, but Egwene had also managed to smuggle out some spoils from the White Cloaks. Among them was a ring left by a fallen sister, which filled Moiraine with both surprise and joy. Egwene then mentioned something strange about Perrin. His eyes had turned yellow and he seemed capable of controlling a pack of wolves. Moiraine was equally astonished. No one knew what powers the Dragon Reborn might possess, so she instructed Egwene to keep Perrin's abilities a secret. Even within the White Tower, revealing the identity of a dragon seed was incredibly dangerous. That evening, Moiraine prepared herself, dressing elegantly. Lan arrived, asking why she had blocked their connection. Moiraine told him that their top priority now was to protect the dragon seeds and not to let personal distractions get in the way. She also explained that she had an important meeting that she needed to attend alone. With that, Moiraine activated her one power, and a portal appeared on the wall of her room. On the other side stood none other than Siwan, the leader of the Weavers. The surroundings looked like the fishing village where Siwan had grown up, a place secluded enough to ensure privacy. As the leader of the Weavers, Siwan was supposed to be impartial and above personal desires, but tonight she was breaking that rule. The two women shared a passionate tongue massage, revealing that Moiraine and Siwan were secretly lovers. Sadly, after their brief moment of intimacy, Moiraine had to ask Siwan to exile her from the White Tower. This would free her from the Blue Sect's orders to remain in the tower and allow her to lead the Dragon Seeds in their mission to save the world. The identity of the 5 Dragon Seeds must remain hidden from the other Weavers at all costs. The next morning, Moiraine confirmed with Lan that the Dragon Seeds were ready. At that moment, Liandrin taunted her again, claiming that her spies had already found the young boys and girls from the 2 rivers. In a fit of anger, Moiraine revealed Liandrin's secret about hiding a man, swiftly turning the tables on her. Truly, the work of a master in the intelligence world. Afterward, Moiraine met with the Ogier and asked him for a favor, which the friendly creature agreed to without hesitation. Next, Moiraine had to take Egwene and the Wise One to meet the Weaver leader. When the 2 girls from the 2 rivers saw each other, they were overcome with emotion, tears welling up in their eyes. After gathering themselves, they stood before Siwan. Egwene was very polite, but the Wise One remained defiant, showing no respect for the Weavers. Siwan remained calm as ever, but her words carried weight. She reminded the girls that regardless of their youth, fear, or reluctance to accept their fates, the Wheel of Time would not be altered. Their mission was far greater than their personal feelings. With the preparations complete, it was time for Moiraine to face her own judgment. She gazed out at the majestic city of Tar Valon, knowing this might be her last time standing at the White Tower. During the trial, Siwan had no choice but to carry out the agreed-upon decision. Moiraine was to be exiled. Unless the Weaver leader herself recalled her, Moiraine would never be allowed to return to the White Tower. The oath-bound punishment, enforced by the staff of law, was absolute and unbreakable. Even the Liandrin was taken aback by the severity of the sentence. Both Moiraine and Siwan were moved to tears, as this punishment meant that Moiraine was no longer a member of the Weavers. When Moiraine turned to leave, the other Weavers had to turn their backs on her, signaling their formal separation. Among the group were Moraine's friends as well as her enemies, but the moment they turned their backs, it meant they would forever be strangers. After leaving the White Tower, Moiraine rode a white horse to the outskirts of the city, arriving at an ancient monument, 2 stone pillars that formed a strange, solitary gateway in the wilderness. The Ogier, true to his word, brought Perrin and Egwene, while Lan arrived with the other 3. This was the first reunion of the group since the bloody battle at the 2 rivers. Moiraine and Lan said farewell to their horses, releasing them. As the group looked on in confusion, the Ogier explained that animals could not survive in the pathway. The mysterious stone gate was an ancient magical passage where a single step could cover 100 miles. Their destination was the Eye of the World, the prison of the Dark One. The Dragon Reborn had to complete the unfinished mission from a previous life. The Dark One's power was slowly awakening, and if they couldn't stop him in time, the entire world would be devoured by monsters and demons. The journey would be perilous, especially for those who weren't the true dragon, but for the sake of the world, they had to take the risk. As Moiraine used her power to open the gateway, an endless void of darkness appeared inside. Staring into the terrifying Eye of the World, the group couldn't help but feel a surge of fear. Yet despite their trepidation, they pressed on, understanding the gravity of the situation. Only Matt hesitated, standing still until the portal closed completely behind them. The scene shifts to an intense battle where the strongest warriors in this world come from the threefold land, and the pregnant woman before us is one of them. Unfortunately, she is about to give birth during the heat of battle, but her enemies show no mercy, as heavily armored knights charge at her one after another. In a desperate attempt to protect the child in her womb, she unleashes a phenomenal burst of strength. Wielding 2 short spears, she fights off 3 opponents at once without losing ground, eventually taking them down one by one. However, just as she faces the final enemy, a labor contraction causes her to falter, and she is struck. Although she manages to counterattack and kill her foe, it's clear she doesn't have much time left. The woman plans to give birth before she dies, but as more enemy soldiers appear, her chances of survival seem slim. The scene shifts back to the main storyline. Since Matt didn't enter the secret passage, Rand and the others refused to leave him behind. However, once the passage closes, it cannot be reopened, and using the one power within the passage is forbidden, as it would attract the Black Wind monster, a creature unique to the passage. The group continues forward, torches in hand. Lan fears that if Matt truly is the Dragon Reborn, they all could perish. Moiraine believes that Matt's dark side is what drew him to the cursed dagger, and if he is indeed the Dragon Reborn, avoiding the Dark One might be the best option. The OGA takes a moment to educate the group. This place was once a paradise, filled with birdsong and beautiful scenery, but the Dark One's influence has turned it into a deadly trap, where a single misstep could lead to disaster. Perrin notices something unusual in the darkness. Upon closer inspection, the Ogier discovers that the guidepost marking their way has been destroyed and abandoned. It will take time to determine the correct path again, so the group rests before setting out once more. Clearly, the person who sabotaged the guidepost is not on the side of justice. Suddenly, a whistle echoes through the dark passage. Egwene turns toward the sound, only to be ambushed by a Black Wind monster. She instinctively strikes it down, but by using the one power, she has drawn the attention of the Black Wind. This creature preys on people's deepest fears, breaking their spirits. With no time to reach the Eye of the World, the group must head to the nearest portal. However, opening the portal requires spell casting, and the monster is already closing in on them. In a critical moment, the Wise One unleashes a powerful burst of one power, holding off the monster long enough for Moiraine to open the door. They narrowly escape the passage and arrive at the Border Kingdom located on the edge of the Demon Realm. This fortress defends against the Trollocs, whose territory surrounds the Eye of the World. Although they are only a day's journey from their destination, this location is still acceptable. The Border Kingdom is allied with the White Tower, and its warriors are well acquainted with Lan, who grew up here. The Border Lord is confident in the kingdom's impenetrable defenses and sees no need for assistance from the White Tower. When asked about Moraine's purpose, he says nothing of the Dragon Reborn, only mentioning that the Trollocs have appeared in the secret passage. The Dark One's unprecedented use of the passage was linked to the night raid in the Two Rivers from the first episode. This revelation immediately catches the Lord's attention, and he orders the passage to be heavily guarded. But when the soldiers arrive at the portal, they find that a mysterious figure has already passed through. In the Border Kingdom, Moiraine has two urgent tasks. First, she needs the local weaver to relay Matt's situation to the Red Sect, confirming that Moiraine no longer trusts Matt. Second, she plans to take the dragon seeds to a tavern to meet someone. Along the way, the sharp-eyed Perrin spots a traveling merchant from the Two Rivers, though the Wise One insists that the merchant must have died in the night raid. The person Moiraine is meeting is a bartender who also happens to be a prophet capable of seeing people's fates. Few know of this secret, but Moiraine is one of them. The bartender speaks in a hushed tone, revealing that she has seen Perrin's eyes turn yellow, blood at the corners of his mouth, Rand cradling a baby, and the two girls becoming weavers. Their fates are deeply intertwined. However, she cannot tell who the Dragon Reborn is, failing to uncover the most crucial information, leaving Moiraine somewhat disappointed. That night, Moiraine had no choice but to inform everyone that the next day, they would all have to cross the Demon Realm to confront the Dark One. The Wise One asked about the bartender's identity, and since the weavers cannot lie, Moiraine had to reveal the truth. She wanted the prophet to help identify who the Dragon Reborn was, but they received no answer. Facing the Dark One meant almost certain death for anyone except the true dragon. Although the dragon seeds had long been mentally prepared for this, now that the day had come, their spirits were heavy. Sensing their hesitation, Moiraine gave them the night to think about whether they were willing to sacrifice their lives to protect the world. Of the four, Egwene was the most resolute. She understood that the others had doubts. Perhaps Moiraine was wrong, and maybe he was leading them all to their doom. But even with the slimmest chance of success, they had to rise to the occasion for the sake of all humankind. That night, Lan and Moiraine also felt the weight of their decisions. This was the place where Lan had grown up, and Moiraine encouraged him to visit old friends, as they might not have the chance to return once they left. Lan agreed, strolling through the familiar streets while the Wise One silently followed, seemingly wanting to say something. Lan had long noticed the Wise One's presence but said nothing. After chatting briefly with the family who had raised him, he invited the Wise One inside to meet them. These people were all that was left of Lan's family after the Demon Realm had gradually overtaken his homeland, where he had once been a prince. On the day the kingdom fell, the royal guards had spirited away the young Lan to the border kingdom, and they became his only family. That night, emotions long held back were finally released, and they shared an honest kiss. Afterward, the wise one's face was full of barely concealed worry. She was anxious about the impending battle and uncertain about the future. Even if they survived, Lan would have to follow Moiraine across the world. The title, the Wise One, meant that she had once vowed never to marry. Lan urged her to live in the moment and not let herself be weighed down by these thoughts tonight. Meanwhile, Rand was also unable to sleep, practicing archery alone in the night. Egwene went out to comfort him, knowing that Rand wasn't afraid of death, but was concerned for the safety of his companions. They reassured each other and vowed to survive the upcoming battle. At times like this, nothing lifts the spirits like a good release. Even at dawn, Rand still hadn't slept, his mind racing with flashes of the past, his father's murmurs as he handed over the family sword, the strength that surged through him when he kicked down a wooden door, the perfect accuracy of his archery when he gave it his all, the whispering of the black wind in the passage, all reminding him that he was the dragon reborn. In the middle of the night, Rand hurried to the tavern, seeking confirmation from the prophet that he was the dragon reborn. She didn't give him a direct answer, but instead poured him a drink and shared more of the story from the opening scene. The soldiers facing the pregnant woman had not attacked her. Instead, they laid down their weapons to help deliver her baby. After giving birth, the woman died, and the soldier took the child and the treasured sword, retreating into the mountains to live in seclusion. That child was Rand. His birth was a miracle, and his extraordinary life was already destined. Rand no longer doubted that he was the dragon, but he asked if he would survive his confrontation with the Dark One. The prophet remained silent. Her lack of response suggested that the answer was not optimistic. The next morning, Egwene knocked on the Wise One's door, but there was no reply. She noticed no one had slept in the room the night before and smiled mischievously. The Wise One returned just then, looking a little embarrassed as she encountered Egwene. Before they could speak further, Perrine entered, asking if they had made their decision. Deep down, they all knew the answer was the same. They would fight. However, at that moment, Lan brought bad news. Moiraine and Rand were missing. Everyone instantly understood what had happened. In the early morning hours, Rand had knocked on Moraine's door and confessed that he was the dragon reborn. By now, they had already left the others behind and were standing at the edge of the demon realm. Before them lay a forest of twisted, bizarre trees. Rand knew that once he stepped inside, he would set the wheel of time into motion, and an unknown future would begin to unfold. The scene shifts to 3,000 years ago when the previous reincarnation of the dragon Luz faced a similar situation. Despite warnings from his wife, who sat on the throne at the time, he insisted on leading 100 male weavers into battle against the Dark One, hoping to imprison him once and for all. However, while they succeeded in imprisoning the Dark One, the male half of the One Power was tainted, leading to the downfall of civilization and the end of male weavers. Fast forward to the present. Moiraine and Rand have been traveling through the demon realm for some time, occasionally passing the grisly remains of those who ventured in and met a terrible fate. Young boys from the Border Kingdom often test their bravery by exploring the demon realm, only to end up like these unfortunate souls. After cautiously covering some distance, the two are now near the Eye of the World, where the Dark One is imprisoned. From here, they can see Lan's homeland. 40 years ago, the Demon Realm's borders barely reached this point, but its expansion is a clear sign of the Dark One's growing power, making this battle inevitable. They rest for an hour before Rand suddenly wakes up in a panic, witnessing a horrifying scene. Someone has stabbed Moiraine straight through from behind. The attacker, with eyes glowing like torches, claims to be the Dark One, unaffected by Rand's arrows. He calls Rand Luz and mocks him for bringing only 2 people this time, as opposed to the 100 much stronger warriors from before. Then, in a disturbingly casual manner, he tries to engage Rand in a conversation about life and dreams. Realizing he's in a nightmare, Rand stabs himself in the gut and instantly wakes up from his dream, bone dry and not wet. Shaken by the Dark One's tactics, Rand demands to know Moiraine's plan to defeat him. Moiraine finally reveals an ancient artifact, a super amplifier created by countless weavers in the past. If Rand channels the One Power into it, they might have a chance to imprison the Dark One again, securing peace for humankind for millennia. Meanwhile, Egwene and the others, realizing that Rand and Moiraine have already left, begin to disagree on their next steps. Egwene is determined to offer support, while Perrin hesitates, not wanting to watch his friend march to his death. Both know that Rand may never return, and the two embrace tightly, comforting one another. Lan is also filled with anguish as Moiraine once again blocks the connection that would allow him to sense his comrades. The Wise One, seeing her lover so distraught, teaches him her listening technique, allowing him to find Moiraine and resolve his feelings. After Lan leaves, the Wise One stands alone on the city wall, sharing a silent understanding with Egwene. Their loved ones have ventured into danger, but they themselves are not exactly safe either. Sensing impending danger, Egwene urges the group to visit the tavern and consult the prophet. The prophet looks intently at the Wise One, who is burning up from magical overload, while the warriors in the tavern are all dead. In the next moment, the city's horns blare. An unprecedented full-scale assault by the Trolloc army is underway against the Border Kingdom. The Border Lord orders the fortress to hold at all costs and instructs a weaver to gather all those who can wield the One Power. Both don their ancestral armor, ready to fight to the death. The enemy forces outnumber the kingdom's army by nearly 5-1, but if they do not resist with everything they have, the human world will be devastated. Unaware of the battle his friends are about to face, Rand is still traveling with Moiraine, learning the most basic techniques for channeling the One Power. When the time comes, they will need to pour that power into the ancient artifact to succeed. Just then, the Trollocs launch an attack. Moiraine tells Rand that it's useless to try and go back to help now. Their only hope lies in defeating the Dark One. Riding as fast as they can, they finally reach the Eye of the World. It is a bottomless dungeon. Rand suggests that Moiraine stop and let him go on alone, but Moiraine has already resolved to sacrifice himself and walks forward without looking back. At the same time, Lan is still making his way through the Demon Realm, far from reaching Rand and Moraine's location. The Eye of the World's depths revealed a yin-yang symbol, and as Rand glanced around, memories of Luz's battle against the Dark One from his past life began to resurface. When Rand stepped into the place where Luz once fought, he was suddenly transported to another world. Here, he was living a peaceful life, married to Egwene, with children, alongside his friend the Wise One. In the real world, however, Rand had fallen into a deep coma, unresponsive to Moraine's desperate calls. The Dark One appeared once more, easily deflecting Moraine's attacks and sealing away her ability to wield the One Power. While things were rapidly deteriorating for Moiraine and Rand, the situation was equally dire elsewhere. The Border Lord had led his warriors to man the frontline fortress, while the women prepared the city's defenses and evacuated civilians. Meanwhile, several strong men stayed behind in the city, not as cowards, but to carry out an even more critical mission. With the fate of the world at stake, Egwene and the others refused to stand idle, joining the city's defense. The Trolloc army was already at the gates, and as they launched their attack, the defenders unleashed a hail of arrows, cutting down scores of Trollocs. The Lord's sister and other women skilled in the One Power formed the final line of defense, ready to make their stand. The Trollocs attacked recklessly, using their own bodies as ladders to scale the fortress walls. Despite the Lord's relentless defense, he was eventually struck down by a spear, dying heroically. The border situation looked grim, but Rand remained trapped in his dream world. Sensing something was off, Rand tested Egwene by asking her some secret questions only they would know. To his surprise, Egwene answered perfectly, making the illusion feel incredibly real, until the Dark One appeared, revealing that the reincarnated dragon had the terrifying ability to shape reality as he wished. If Rand so desired, he could create the world of his dreams. At the same time, the Dark One taunted Moiraine, but she was prepared. She drew a dagger ready to end both their lives should Rand succumb to the dark temptation. Meanwhile, Perrin joined the Border Kingdom's excavation team, tasked with digging up the Valeri Horn, a powerful artifact. In the final battle, the dragon could summon ancient heroes with its sound, turning the tide of war. Unnoticed, a merchant from Two Rivers secretly snuck into the city with a pair of faceless beings. The fortress had already been breached, and the only defense against the Trollocs was the Lord's sister and her companions. She requested that they channel their One Power into her, and as they did, she began chanting a forbidden spell. The Trollocs drew closer, lightning crackled in the sky, and as the sister unleashed the One Power toward the heavens, a torrent of lightning bolts rained down, obliterating the advancing army. Simultaneously, in his dream, Rand was becoming seduced by the visions of his deepest desires. Under the Dark One's guidance, he began channeling the One Power, releasing his true strength as the reincarnated dragon. However, the power he was channeling bore the mark of the tainted male half of the One Power. Seeing his success within reach, the Dark One was elated, but then Rand suddenly changed course. He declared that he wasn't so selfish as to create a world where only his wishes came true. With that, Rand awoke, fully aware of his reality. He seized the ancient artifact, channeled the One Power into it, and launched an attack that shattered the Dark One into oblivion. However, victory didn't bring relief. The forbidden spell cast by the Lord's sister had spiraled out of control, and she couldn't stop the flow of One Power. One by one, her companions were consumed by the overwhelming force, their bodies burning from within. In a last-ditch effort, the Wise One absorbed Egwene's One Power into her sexy body, instantly igniting. As the Lord's sister perished, the Wise One was also on the brink of death. In the city, just as the excavation team finally unearthed the Valeri horn, they were ambushed by the faceless beings led by the merchant. This merchant, a servant of darkness, had always frequented Two Rivers with an ulterior motive. His true goal was the 5 dragon seeds. While Rand is the reincarnated dragon, the other 4 also play a crucial role since they are time anchors who are the masters of destiny and can sway the outcome of the ultimate battle between good and evil. Fearing that the male half of the One Power would drive him mad, Rand chose self-exile, staying behind in the demon realm and refusing to return. Moiraine, having lost her power, was on the verge of collapse by the time Lan found her. She clutched a piece of Quindiller, the material used to forge the Dark One's prison, realizing that this final battle had only just begun. Perrin, helplessly watching as the merchant made off with the horn, could do nothing to stop him. Meanwhile, Egwene clutched the Wise One and wept bitterly. It all seemed so hopeless. But in that moment, Egwene instinctively unleashed the One Power, miraculously healing the Wise One's wounds, showing that even in the depths of despair, hope still lingered. The scene shifts. Off the west coast of the continent, a majestic fleet suddenly appears. On board the ships, those capable of wielding the One Power are treated as slaves. As they collectively channel their power, the once calm sea churns into a monstrous tsunami sweeping toward the land. With that, Season 1 of this drama concludes.